My name is Andrew Guerrero. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am a prevention education specialist at Laura's House. So I would like to, again, thank you all for joining us. I'm joined by my lovely colleagues in prevention and community education, Yanira Mendez, who will talk about the comparable typical trends during this time. Molly Delbridge will discuss how to be a bystander during this time. And then Jennifer Ponce will explain protective factors, and Veronica Stevens will talk about available resources. So again, I would like to thank you all for joining us at this webinar. We really wanted to organize this webinar because we felt it was really important to, as we see concerns growing on how to safety plan and how to be an active bystander during these uncertain times. So hopefully this webinar will give you all tools on how to intervene and be an active bystander to ensure safety in our community. So first, I'm going to talk about some risk factors, primarily stress, as we're noticing that's a very prominent risk factor in the potential for enacting violence. So obviously, these are very stressful times, and just about everyone is stressed. People who got furloughed are stressed. People who are still working but are in different workspaces are experiencing stress. People who are still doing their normal routines and still working in riskful environments or environments where they're experiencing more risk. So all of our essential workers, right, having that stress of being exposed to COVID-19. We're seeing potential risk factors for people for contracting. So children, teens, young adults are stressed about school, graduation, education, friendships, and all other people's, whose routines got out of whack, right? So these stressors are growing exponentially even as we enter the realm of multiple marginalization. So communities who already are more exposed to stress as it is, right? And now compiling the stress with COVID-19, it just exponentially increases. So when we talk about stress, we're not just talking about it, as an emotional or even a psychological response, because as we know, stress can cause a physiological response as well. So just a little bit of how stress can also cause a physiological response. So when you're stressed, the adrenal glands ramp up the release of hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, and norepinephrine. So adrenaline speeds up your heart rate and can raise blood pressure. Cortisol can cause changes in the blood vessels that can over time increase the risk of heart attack and stroke. Meanwhile, the brain relays the stress signals to the gut, which changes up routine to allow your body to focus on the stressor. So that's what's behind the butterflies in your stomach kind of feeling. Then it could also lead to digestive problems that can affect the composition of your gut bacteria. So according to an Emory University professor of medicine, Sharon Bergquist, mentions that when stress is chronic rather than temporary, it can also dampen the function of the immune system, right? So slowing healing times and making you more vulnerable to infections. But people who are constantly stressed about things like paying rent or getting adequate childcare have the worst of the lot. So again, as we're noticing right now, especially with COVID-19, how the stay-at-home orders are in effect, people are under constant stress. It's not just a one-time thing. This is something that's on a continuum. We're constantly being home, and it's like the period's becoming longer. So obviously, everyone is under that constant stress. So this is in the long run affecting someone's immunoresponse, right? Which can cause even more stressors, right? So research shows that almost every system in the body can be influenced by chronic stress. So when chronic stress goes unreleased, it suppresses the body's immune system and ultimately manifests as illness. Under normal circumstances, 3 minutes after the threatening situation is over, and the real or imagined danger is removed, the fight or flight response subsides, and the body relaxes and returns to its normal status. So during this time, the heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, muscle tension, digestion, metabolism, and the immune system all return to normal. And if stress persists after the initial fight or flight reaction, the body's reaction enters a second stage. So during this stage, the activity of the sympathetic nervous system declines and the adrenal secretion is lessened. So as we see, right, all of these responses, right, the continuous responses of stress are really impacting us physiologically, right? So we're in a situation where a bunch of stressed individuals are all cooped together, and this could be a dangerous combo for households that have cases of domestic violence or even family violence. So this can cause, or it's exposed teens and family members that are in a situation where they are trapped. or feel that they are trapped, right? For parenting styles that are more strict and restrictive, like, like having lack of access to technology or social media to connect with friends or other family members, this could increase the impact of stress on children and teens. And for those who are in abusive relationships with their intimate partner, they're even more restricted by being potentially constantly exposed to violence. So stress, as we see, is significantly contributed to LS, or by multiple stressors, are more likely to result to physical violence in an attempt to regain control over their environment. So in another study that examined, parents, or that examined like abusive risks or abusive behaviors and social isolation and stress, it showed that parents who experience or describe themselves as overwhelmed by multiple stressors are more likely to result to physical violence in an attempt to regain control, right? It examined, right, that stress and social isolation in combination evidence greater abuse risk than those reporting only higher levels of stress or social isolation, right? So it's all about the combination that we're experiencing with COVID-19, the combo of experiencing stress, the combo of social isolation is in result affecting how parents are, parenting, right? So with that said, talking about stress, it's a lot, right? It's a lot of, a lot of, negative impacts of stress and how that can affect behaviors of folks who are caught up in an environment. So now I would like to transition to Yanira, who's going to talk about the comparable typical trends.
Good morning, everyone. I'm glad you were all able to join us. So kind of how Andrew was speaking on vulnerable populations. Yes, there are vulnerable populations during this time. And here we see that intersection with everything that's happening with COVID-19, but also folks who are being hurt by their partners. So some of those vulnerable populations, as Andrew has already mentioned, include people who might not have access to healthcare, people of color, our LGBTQ community, immigrant populations, and economically disadvantaged folks. And so with this, there's already vulnerable populations existing. And so this has an impact on how, if people even reach out to services and programs, but also how people might respond if they do witness an incident, and so those folks who are bystanders. So it can impact folks in various ways. But as a community, we want to come together to try to help in any way that we can, because ultimately when we talk about ending violence, it really takes everyone and the entire community as a whole. Now, we have seen that, for instance, a lot of folks, because of that fear, that they may become invisible to a lot of agencies who still have services and programs running at this time. And they also become invisible to other supportive networks because people are already in isolation because of COVID-19, but they may have already been facing isolation within their relationships. And so with this, we have seen that there are some comparable trends that we have seen with other situations, for instance, with natural disasters. So we can assume that during this time, it may appear similar to what's happening with COVID-19. So it can have an impact on someone. So those natural disasters could include tsunamis, earthquakes, floods, hurricanes, and things such as that nature. So if someone's already facing, again, being hurt by their partner, they're also facing the survival of trying to manage through and navigate through a natural disaster, or for instance, right now with COVID-19. So what we have seen is that there is an increase, kind of how Andrew has already mentioned with the stress. There's a stress that is increased there, and so there's that added stress with how they navigate relationships. So this isn't to justify or excuse someone's behaviors, but it is to understand that dynamic, that if there's already an abusive relationship happening, is intact there, that adding this additional stressor can further exacerbate the situation. And so just understanding that nature of it is extremely important. So as bystanders, as folks who may witness, for instance, being neighbors, family members, so on and so forth. That's why we're going to talk about what steps people can take, especially during this time. And as I already mentioned, this has an impact not only on folks who are being hurt by their partners, but also it has an impact on how people respond to these incidences and what they can do. So I'll give it to Molly to talk about that and what that looks like.
Thank you, Yanira. So today I will be talking a little bit about how we can respond in these kinds of situations, because as Andrew said, we're seeing increased stress, which may lead to increased incidences of domestic violence in the home. And informal sources of support like neighbors, friends, and family have always played a key role in supporting survivors as they're close to the situation and they might be aware of the abuse that's happening, because again, maybe they know this person really well or they see the couple a lot. So again, they might be one of the first people to learn about what's actually happening. This is accentuated even more in the times of social isolation. So at this time, victims might be reaching out less for services as there might be more control happening in the home. As Andrew mentioned, right, there might be different kinds of things that are happening in the home that are different than usual. So it could be that they're monitoring their cell phone usage and then they're not able to reach out for help or support from friends and family, as well as more of this formal sources of support. And then, as Yanira mentioned, other potential points of intervention like coworkers, teachers, other agencies that might get connected to this person might not be able to support them in these kinds of situations, or might not be aware of the situation right now because there's less interaction outside of the home. So that's why right now, bystander intervention is crucial at this time, particularly from people who are part of that informal social network, right? So friends, family, neighbors, people that still have contact with folks who are going through this. So although it is crucial at this time, there are limitations to what we can do at this time, so it might be tricky to intervene. Today I'm going to provide a couple responding tips and examples on how you can intervene during this time of social distancing. And we do have it up on the screen here. So the first one I'll go over is report domestic violence incidents. As I mentioned before, victims of domestic violence might not have the opportunity to reach out for support. They might not have the opportunity to call 911 if they need it, to reach out for services if they need it. So as a bystander, if you hear something happening in the home, call 911. If you hear some sort of violence happening in the home, that is what you can do at that time. And again, victims might not be able to do it, so it's crucial that bystanders step up and make that call. The second bullet point that we have up here is document DV incidents. So it may or may not be something that you're calling 911 for, but if you hear something or see something that you think is part of that relationship, the domestic violence in that relationship, maybe it's unhealthy behaviors, maybe it's abusive behaviors that you notice, you can document these incidences. And this can be useful for a couple different reasons. First, if you talk to the victim about what you've seen, maybe you've talked to them about it before, maybe you're bringing it up to them for the first time. If you've written down or recorded what you've seen, you can bring up actual incidences of things that you've seen, things that you're concerned about. Like, hey, I noticed that they were putting you down the other day, that they called you this name the other day. Like, can we talk about this? Are you okay? So again, writing it down, having documentation of it can help you actually talk about those specific incidences. And the second point is that if you document these incidents, they can be provided to the victim for their usage. So for instance, if they are wanting to file a restraining order, the documentation of these incidents can be useful in remembering or recalling incidences that they can include in their report. So again, documenting these incidences can be really useful. The third bullet point up here is check in on your neighbors and your loved ones. So during social isolation, we're all losing contact with friends and family, in-person contact, right? And this can be particularly impactful for victims of domestic violence who are potentially living in an even more controlling situation. So it's important to make time to, spend time with them and to let them know that they're important to you. And again, at this time, there are limitations to doing that. You might not be able to do it in person, but there are a lot of ways to check in, including phone calls, video calls. You can use Zoom like we're using right now. And video might be useful because with video, you can actually see what's happening, see what's going on in the home. So if it is that you are aware of abuse that's happening and you want to check in on them, calling them on the phone could let you know what's happening, but if you are able to see what's happening as well, that could give you more indication about what's going on in the home. And it might not be that you want to check in on them or bring up what's happening, right? It might be that you want to spend time with them because again, social isolation is real during this time, and we want to make sure that people who are being victimized are spending time with other folks as well. So you could make a consistent schedule to spend time together. For instance, every Sunday at 4 o'clock or whenever you decide to do something, right? It could be a virtual check-in, could be a virtual dinner. Maybe you coordinate a virtual movie night or game nights, anything to spend time together. If you do want to check in on them about your concerns, maybe you heard something or you saw something or you're aware of the abuse, maybe it was happening before, make sure that it's safe to talk to them about it. And something that's particularly relevant with this is that you want to make sure that the abuser can't hear the conversation. And again, this can be tricky right now as everyone is home, but you want to make sure that they're alone and they're able to talk about it, because if the abuser is hearing this kind of conversation, it could exacerbate the violence afterward. So here are some options. Again, during this time of social distancing, you could coordinate a time to talk on the phone when the abuser's not there. You could, maybe you see them outside on their way to do an essential task like going to the grocery store, and you check in on them then. Before I move on to the last point, I want to provide a couple different tips on supporting someone who's going through this. First and foremost, you want to let them know that you are a safe and supportive person to talk to about this. And a big part of that is listening to them without judgment. So listening to their experience without telling them exactly what they have to do, right? Instead of telling them, you can provide them with options, and part of that is doing your research about what the options are. The next one is believe what they're telling you, because this could be a fear. Maybe that's the reason why they don't tell someone about what's happening, because they're afraid that no one's going to believe them. So believe them when they're telling you what's happening. Remind them that it's not their fault. And this can be a big fear or a manipulation from the abuser, telling them that what's happening is their fault in those situations, reminding them that it's not their fault. And then last, provide options and provide resources. And part of that is knowing what resources are available in your community. So for instance, knowing domestic violence agencies in the area and what resources are available there. Veronica will go over Laura's House services at the end of the presentation. But if you're not in the area and you want in-person services, do your research on local domestic violence agencies. And if you're at a loss of where to start, you can check out the National Domestic Violence Hotline and give them a call and talk to them about where you are and the resources that you're looking for. So again, this is a tricky time for bystander intervention because we do have limitations, like not being able to check in with someone in person. We want to make sure that we're being safe and that we're maintaining social distance while being able to support people who might need our support. As I mentioned before, your role as a bystander is essential during this time, but know that you don't have to do it alone. As a bystander or a loved one of someone in a DV relationship, you can call local domestic violence agencies and ask for advice on how to respond to this kind of situation. So again, know that you're not alone and ask for advice if you need it. Now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Puntz to talk about protective factors.
Thank you so much for that, Molly. And yeah, everything that everyone has covered so far, I think has been very valuable, because that's kind of been one of the bigger questions that we've had and that we've received is, well, how do I act and what can I do, because we are so distant at this time from one another. One of the things that we have found as far as people who are reaching out, it's actually not the victims themselves or the potential client, but it is friends and loved ones. And one of the things that they have found as serving as a protective factor for a lot of our domestic violence victims right now, finding themselves in isolation and potentially with an aggressor, is a neighbor who is maybe hearing things and seeing things that they hadn't before heard or seen. And in essence, those neighbors are now turning around and they're reaching out for help. An example of this, just the other day, actually, I had someone reach out to me who had said, you know, I was outside with my child. We've been going on a lot more walks now. I saw two neighbors who I've never seen before. And they were actually in the middle of, it looked like an argument to them outside. Things got escalated. You know, they had masks on, so they said that they couldn't really tell like who they are. But, you know, they asked, how do I respond and what could I have done in that scenario? I've never seen them before. This is something I wasn't even aware of. And one thing that we're finding is that this is becoming more and more common, where friends and neighbors who are home now are witnessing things and they're hearing things. So that is serving as one of the protective factors for people who are home and who are in isolation. So that's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that as a community, we are well aware of what resources are available. How do we safety plan based on those tips that Molly just gave us, and why this is really important. And as that being one of the biggest protective factors that we have right now is being at home and kind of being community another way, is understanding just bystander intervention in and of itself. It's not an easy thing to do. And I think as prevention educators, that's one of the number one questions that we get asked when we facilitate our 40-hour training, after our heart presentations and our community presentations. The number one question we get is, well, how do I act? What do I do? How do I help a friend? Which those dynamics in and of itself can be very hard, because sometimes maybe the relationship has been going on time and time again. Maybe there is physical violence, so you don't want to put yourself in the way of harm. Maybe you've tried to have conversations with this person and talked about some of the things that you've seen, so they've distanced themselves from you. So it can be very challenging to be an active bystander right now, as we've mentioned throughout this webinar. It's a little bit trickier because we are so distant from one another. But I think it's important to remember that these same principles still apply. So we do live in a community. There's something called the bystander effect, whereas we sometimes think, well, it's not my problem, someone else will take care of it. Just going back a little history on bystander intervention and where that comes from, and there is some debate whether the story is accurate or whether it's not accurate. It doesn't really matter, because this is where, you know, the term bystander intervention, bystander effect came from, and that's from the story of Kitty Genovese, who was a young woman that was attacked on her way home. Neighbors heard what was happening and no one notified law enforcement. No one stepped in, and ultimately she lost her life. And that's where that comes from, just identifying that as a community, sometimes things are happening around us and either we're not equipped or we don't know how to respond or how to act. So, you know, we want to make sure that we are a viable resource for you as community members, because at this time, we sort of are the ones who are a little bit on the front lines here as far as providing a resource, connecting with our friends, connecting with our neighbors, and making sure that they know what resources are ready and available to them. So if you're needing any additional information on how to be a bystander, if there are things that you are witnessing that you're hearing and you'd like some additional support, at the very end of this presentation, you're going to get our email address. So please feel free to email with us, text with us, call our hotline, because we'd be happy to help you safety plan as a bystander. And when we do get asked and approached about, you know, being an effective bystander, we give bystanders safety plans the same way we would a client or a victim who is needing assistance. So part of a safety plan as a bystander would be knowing what resources are available, knowing how to access those resources, having important phone numbers saved in your phone, such as the National Domestic Violence Hotline, our Laura's House 24-hour hotline, understanding that if someone does call, what are they going to get? Well, we have shelter services. And as I mentioned, Veronica is going to go over everything that we do provide. But as a bystander and as someone who is home, it is important to make yourself really familiar with, you know, the area you live in, what's available to you, so that when you are acting, you can provide those things and do so in a safe manner. And as Molly mentioned, one thing that we do recommend is to make sure that you believe this person. They've been told time and time again that, you know, they're making things up or they're crazy. There's a lot of that happens within the dynamics of these relationships. So as that outside outsider looking in. And as a bystander, there are ways that you can effectively have an impact in helping your friends, your neighbors, and your loved ones. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Veronica, who's going to give you more in-depth detail about the programs and services that we provide and tools that you can have as part of your safety plan.
Well, hello, everyone. As she said, my name is Veronica Stevens, and I'm going to kind of tie all of this together for us and then tap into what others have said. Multiple times people have referred to a safety plan in place, and that's really important. And again, in this time of social distancing and shelter in place, when potential victims are living with their abusers, everything that we normally say is adapted to, you can only do this, or it's only safe to do this if the abuser is not in the home. As much as we are all required to be in the home, the reality is we still do walks usually, or have to go out to the store. So if at any time when the abuser leaves, then you'd be able to kind of incorporate this. And if you are a bystander, you'd be able to pass this information along to your friend or family member who's in that abusive situation. So first, when they create a safety plan, it's always best to have a copy or the original of all your legal documents. And that would include birth certificates, not only of the victim themselves, but of their children, even a marriage certificate if they have access to that, as well as passports, visas, cash on hand. And again, if they're really being tracked, especially if there's financial abuse, then perhaps the victim, when they go and do their grocery shopping or Target or Walmart run, whatever it is, just get cash at the end to be able to kind of start putting cash away, because often abusers will shut the victim off of all bank accounts. So that's something that they can easily do, as well as have emergency phone numbers, because often victims will have their cell phones taken away or shut down. And so if they have just a list of phone numbers of important friends and family that they can reach out to in that time, that would be good. Even getting a burner phone, to have that in a safe place as well. To pack a bag and put it in a place that's safe, where they know the abuser will not see, and that's where they can place all these important documents. When you go out and do your grocery run, maybe you can swing by Home Depot or Lowe's and get an extra set of not only car keys, but home keys, in case those are also taken away from you. So that can also be put in the emergency bag. And then if you do have children, then if you can grab a stuffed animal or toy to put in that bag as well. If you decide that a shelter is going to be the next step of action, that way you can have that extra set of clothes for you and your children, as well as a lovey, one of their favorite toys, that they would be able to help them through that kind of trauma. So those are all the things that we suggest for individuals who are in that place. But if you're a bystander, and if you have, let's say you have adult children, and one of your adult children are in a relationship that perhaps you're really concerned that they are on the receiving end of abuse, I'm going to go ahead and give out our hotline now, and we're going to finish with our hotline as well. But put our hotline in your phone. That way, if they do come to you for help, the very first thing when they call our hotline is our trained advocate is going to ask if it's a secured line. And what that means is, do they share that cell phone service with their partner? Because often, we have family plans. You save more when you do that. And if that's the case, then we are always on the assumption to protect them, and that phone call be traced. And so if you have it on your phone, then that will be untraceable, as long as the abuser is not part of your family plan. And so our hotline is 866-498-1511. And again, we're going to have this at the end on the screen, but it's 866-498-1511. We know that we are live here and we're streaming on Facebook, so individuals outside of our region might also be hearing this. I'm going to give you the National Domestic Violence Hotline number as well. So wherever you're at, you're going to be able to access this. It is 800-799-7233. Again, that's 799-7233. Those are both hotlines that are 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So as a bystander, have both of those phone numbers in your phone. We also have a secure text line if somebody would prefer just texting rather than making a phone call. We find that kind of the younger generation prefers that. They're a little bit more acclimated to that. So you can text our Laura's House text line, which is 949-484-8440. So that's something as a bystander that you'd be able to do. And also in the safety planning, we also recommend as a bystander, have your own emotional safety plan in place. As Molly did say, if you are a neighbor and you hear the violence happening next door, that's not something that you're going to want to put yourself in harm's way. You can always call 911. Let the emergency professionals handle that and don't put yourself in that way. As another emotional safety resort is to understand that you have zero power to control the outcome. And if you really tell yourself that, not only at the beginning when you begin this relationship with them, if you've been able to enter into those discussions, but throughout as they're making these decisions, that you're not able to control their outcome. This is their journey and the choices belong to them on how they navigate that. And so if you begin to feel powerless, if this begins to feel overwhelming, never hesitate to reach out for your own medical support as well. So reach out to a professional counselor and begin to talk to them about this. There's some that might have to get kind of that boundary in place because we're all under an enormous amount of stress right now. And if you already kind of have that pre-existing propensity for depression or anxiety, and now you find yourself trying to help a friend, but you're spiraling as a result, then it's okay to have that safe boundary in place. What you don't want to do is ghost that individual, but have an honest conversation if it is a secured line, and if they say it's fine, I can talk now because he or she's not present, the abuser, and just say, I love you, I want to support you, but honestly, I don't feel equipped right now to be able to give you what you need and deserve. So how can I help you with the resources that you need, or what other person, because I'm not going to hang up or end this conversation until I know you have another safe place to go. At that time, you're going to give them the hotline or the text line numbers. But self-care is really important for everyone involved. And so as a bystander, have your own emotional safety plan as well as a safety plan in place for those who are on the receiving end. As far as Laura's House programs and services, just so that everybody knows, and we've been saying this in every webinar, all of our programs and services are readily available. They look a little different because of the shelter-in-place orders, but that hotline, there is still a trained advocate there. We are still offering our counseling resource center, or excuse me, our counseling resources as well. We've switched to telehealth, and so if it's existing clients, then we are providing that ongoing support through our counseling via telephone. And a safe way to be able to make that telephone call or have that conversation is just tell the person that you're going out for a walk, you're needing some fresh air. And so take that walk and make those phone calls. Or you've got to do a store run and just sit in the parking lot, and that's when you can begin those conversations, as long as it's a secured line. And so our counselors know all the safety measures that need to be put in place, and so they will direct you on how to make sure that you're safe but still receiving the support that you need. We are also able to offer legal advocacy during this time. Again, it looks different, but we're able to offer all of the services we did before the shelter in place. And so if you are needing that restraining order or have questions about a restraining order, then feel free to call the hotline, and they will go ahead and capture your information, and someone's going to reach out to you from our legal advocacy to begin those wheels in motion to make sure that you're protected. If you have children, make sure that they're protected, and you are not going to have to navigate that legal process alone. Our shelter is also still open, and so to access all of our services, it is the hotline. So that's why it's so important to have that on your phone, especially as a bystander. So our emergency shelter is still operational and in place. So if that is imminent and you need that protection, that's going to be offered to you on the very first phone call. And to protect you, your health, and those of our staff and our clients in the shelter, again, it looks a little differently, but you're going to be offered those emergency services immediately, as well as our transitional home is still in place. And then you have just seen our education department. This is who we are, and we still offer all of our trainings rather than in person. We are doing webinars, and so teachers can feel free to still reach out to us, and either they host the Zoom or we can even set up the webinar in our Zoom, and then give the link to the teacher, as well as all other agencies out there. I do the adult education, and so agencies or universities that want some of that adult education are also able to go on our website. You can still book presentation. It's so easy to do. You do the time, the date, what topic you want, and that's when the communication will start on, are you going to set up the Zoom or that online platform, or are we? But we'll be able to take care of you that way. We are also now offering via Zoom kind of community support as well. And so right now we have our Healthy Family series going. It is cumulative. We started last week. It is 3 parts. We're doing our second session tonight, and that is you have to attend all 3 sessions. So at the end of this session, we'll go ahead and get another series up online. We'll probably switch the dates and times to accommodate those who couldn't make Wednesday evenings, and that you register beforehand. That's really interactive, and it kind of gets that going. So with that all in place, I also want you to know we can really use your support during this time. So if you can go on our website and you're able to support us financially, just so that you know, our hotline calls have increased by 40% since the shelter in place. So the needs are great, and we can absolutely use your support. So if you go to the donate button, it's going to give you various ways that you can support us during this time. Super easy to navigate. We also, you can click, there's a little box that says Amazon. So you can click on the Amazon link and it will pop up all of our immediate needs, and then you just purchase those and they are shipped directly to us. So that's super easy to be able to do while you shelter in place and still supporting all of our needs. So we really appreciate your support during this time, understanding that it is a unique time. And with that, I want to go ahead and open this up for questions as we go along and start addressing those. And this is our texting line. So let me go ahead and give you our texting line. Apparently, the one that I gave you, I was not given the correct one. So the texting line is 949-484-8440. Again, if you just populate on the chat, you will see the numbers. And one of my favorite tricks is I just take, if you can't screenshot, just get your cell phone out, and then just take pictures of our numbers, and that can also help. So instead of putting in your contacts, you can just have them in your photo gallery. A question we can address: people in vulnerable populations may also fear law enforcement and do not call law enforcement. What can someone do to help instead? Or how can you gauge when it is an emergency and when you want to call? So Molly had to step away. She's going to give another presentation, but I'm going to open this up for anybody who wants to hop on and address the law enforcement issue.
Hi there. So that is a great question. I know that's a question that comes up a lot, and some folks who may have that vulnerability when it comes to law enforcement could be communities of color, immigrant communities. So it can also include our LGBTQ community. So it really can have that impact on many folks, and so we definitely understand that fear. So as Molly mentioned, the different types of interventions could really come into place if that fear exists. So if someone doesn't feel comfortable in getting law enforcement involved, it can be helpful to do things that de-escalate the situation. So it really depends on what is happening, but any way to de-escalate the situation, if you don't feel comfortable in directly approaching folks, maybe doing something to distract them or to change whatever situation is happening so that their attention goes into something else. And afterwards, if, for instance, when I think about this question, I think of, for instance, if it's a neighbor. Afterwards, if you feel safe enough to do so, you can connect with the person and say, hey, this is what I heard, or this is what I saw, and I did this to de-escalate the situation, but I just wanted to check in with you. If something were to happen, would you feel comfortable in having me call law enforcement? And if you're the bystander and you don't feel comfortable in calling law enforcement, then you can have someone else connect with them. So for instance, if you know another neighbor that may feel comfortable in doing so, if you're at the store and you see a manager, maybe having them call law enforcement. So a way to also gauge whether you think law enforcement should be involved is if it's a life-threatening situation or if someone needs medical assistance. So I hope that helps. If anyone else has any additions, I don't know. So I'll connect back to the team.
Jennifer, I'm going to ping a question your way. So let's say that it is a parent who has an adult child, and they absolutely know that this child is in an abusive relationship, but they fear that if they actually talk to their child, obviously that alienation can come in place. They know that their child has made this decision to remain with your son-in-law or daughter-in-law, with their partner, and you want to keep those lines of communication open. You don't want to alienate them. You don't want them to run off, but you also want to start a conversation on, hey, if you ever need help, how does an adult parent actually, which could really cross over to an aunt as well that sees one of their nieces or nephews or even a friend, but I find it especially tricky with adult children and that parent relationship. So how could a parent approach that conversation with one of their children?
A really good question, Veronica, and you're right, because that can be very hard. And it's the same as, having a conversation with anyone, a best friend or someone, but obviously that parent to child dynamic is pretty unique in that, especially if the parent is witnessing or is hearing things, and this is their, their baby, their child who they love, that in turn is definitely going to affect them and hurt them in a way far more greater potentially than just like if a sister or friend were going through something like that. And you're absolutely right in highlighting that there is a risk that if I, approach my child, I don't want them to then cut communication with me and not find me to be that safe person. So going back to what Molly had said, I think that is key, because we definitely want to approach these situations with a level of empathy, understanding, and sometimes it does take us almost not completely eliminating, but somewhat removing our emotion from the scenario and the dynamic. Now, the number one important thing here is safety. So if we notice that maybe our adult child is in a situation that could potentially be, very unsafe, maybe they've been threatened in the past, or there has been physical violence or physical harm, it is okay for you as the parent or as anyone to reach out to us and to safety plan and maybe get some more information or text with us or reach out to that national hotline, because there are tools available to you. And I think educating and empowering yourself and knowing what is available is also very crucial and also very key, so that when you do feel comfortable enough or safe enough, it is important for you to be able to say like, hey, I've been reading up, or there's a lot of articles that have been coming down about, intimate partner violence and kind of what these cycles look like. And this is what I'm learning. And sometimes just providing it in the form of education can be helpful, as opposed to coming and telling someone what they should and shouldn't do. But I think really informing yourself, understanding what resources are available, giving yourself the knowledge and education, and then when you approach them and have that conversation, doing it from a place and position of love and also a little bit of empathy. But I will say that can be very tricky and it can be very difficult. So please feel free to reach out with us, talk to us and our trained advocates who can definitely help a little bit more with that, with helping you feel empowered in having that conversation. because even your role in that scenario would be to then empower your child so that they would be able to get help and access the services if that's something that they're wanting.
Okay, thank you. And Andrew, I'm going to pull you on in. So one thing that I didn't say with our education department is we also offer a 40-hour training 3 times a year. And we do that, for one, because advocates who want to be able to come and volunteer with Laura's House, most certainly if you're going to be employed with Laura's House, the state of California requires for anybody who volunteers or works for a domestic violence agency to get 40 hours of domestic violence advocacy training. And so we are certified to be able to conduct those trainings, and we do offer them 3 times a year. So Andrew, if you can go ahead and tell the folks a little bit about what is covered in that 40-hour, if they want to be able to get involved, as well, especially with people sheltering in place, they want to know if there's anything they can do from home to help. So go ahead and let them know about our July, what kind of all of the speakers and what it looks like. And now that we're not in classrooms, what does it look like online if anybody's interested, and how do they access?
Thanks, Veronica. A great question. Plugging in all the stuff. So we are offering our training in July. So recently we are transitioning into an online platform. So we are gonna do it webinar style, also on Zoom. So, you know, with just making sure that we are taking the necessary precautions in the case that there are still going to be limitations in gatherings. We want to make sure that we're offering that training still, to make sure that we are getting as many advocates as possible, as many informed folks as possible to be educated in this field and in this work, to be able to support survivors in the best way possible. So again, even if you're not interested even in this field in general, but you're interested in educating yourself and being more informed on domestic violence and educating yourself on how to best support that community, I encourage you all to take that training. So that training is still being offered in July. Like I mentioned, you can do that by going on our website, and under the Get Involved section, there will be a little scroll down section, and it'll say 40-hour training. And then you would go ahead and click that, and then it will definitely, it's very user friendly. It'll share with you how to get how to get registered for the training. So the training is great. We try to be as thorough, that's not the word I'm looking for, but as thorough with like all of our topics as possible. We want to make sure that all of our participants are knowledgeable in multiple aspects of domestic violence. So we definitely go through issues on like things like elder abuse, the dynamics of intimate partner violence. So going over definitions, the history, going over law enforcement and their role, talking about legal advocacy, different counseling techniques, right? So it's very, very, I keep saying thorough, but that's not the word I'm looking for, but it definitely goes in depth. And again, we try to make sure that the cultural competency piece is in there. So we go over a toxic masculinity, we go over communities of color, we go over immigration and those impacts on survivors, right? So those are just a couple of the topics, just at the top of my head, of the folks that we're getting to facilitate the training with us, our guest speakers. So we are still working on getting our speakers, but obviously, like, you know, with all of what's going on, it's a little bit, for some folks, it's definitely something that is not within their comfort level, but obviously there's folks that want to do that, do it. Sometimes trainings can be hard to take because of like distance and location, and sometimes it's hard to drive at a certain location, but with this, you know, shelter in place, it's, for some folks it's a little bit easier to be at home and be able to log in, and it's just simple like that. But yeah, so that's our training. And if you're interested in any of that, I can go ahead and leave my email as well. That way, if anybody's more interested in more details of the training, you can connect with me, as I am going to be overseeing this upcoming training for July.
Thank you, Andrew. And as you said, it is a very comprehensive training. And as a bystander, especially if you do have a family member, a loved one, maybe your best friends in this, if you take that 40-hour, you're going to learn about victim pathology. You're going to learn about the abuser pathology, why this is happening, why are they staying? That is something that is the #1 question, is why do they stay? I wouldn't stay. And they begin to project what they think and perceive they would do onto their loved one, when in fact they have really no idea what they would do in that situation. None of us do unless we're faced with it. And so it kind of rolls out all of that information. So it's not just for professionals that want to do it or they want to volunteer. It really is for individuals who just want to gain better understanding, especially if it's someone in your family, and you will definitely gain understanding by the time it is over on not only what abuse is, but how you can navigate it. So with that, I don't know if we have any other questions. I'm going to bat this back to Jennifer.
All right. Well, if anyone does have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to that email address that was up on your screen for a little bit, and we will put it in the chat for anyone now. And we did have one more question that was just asking about, you know, someone disappearing after after they noticed that there was an incidence of violence there. So Yanira did put that answer in the chat, just saying, you know, recommending checking in, asking how they're doing. And I think for a lot of us, when we are either hearing things, seeing things, or there is an opportunity for us to be a bystander, that checking in piece, the empathy piece, and then shifting the power back to the person is what's key. And as Andrew was mentioning, the 40-hour training, that is the whole goal of advocacy, and the whole goal of the 40-hour training is to train and empower our advocates so that they are able to educate and empower the victim and shift the power back. That is our goal. And you know, as bystanders, as community members, as friends, and as loved ones, we can all do that. We all have the capacity to do that. And we are here as an agency to definitely provide any additional support that we can. So with that, we definitely want to thank every single one of you for joining us here. We apologize that we did have some issues getting it up to Facebook, but what we're going to do is post the video. So if anyone would like to refer back, it will be there, and it'll also be up on our YouTube channel. And then just as a reminder, if anyone's looking to support our work, it's definitely needed during this time as always. But please feel free to visit our wish list on our website, also our Amazon. We do have a wish list there, and we appreciate each and every single one of you. So don't hesitate to reach out. If you'd like to take the training, send us an email, but we want to thank you all for joining us. Have a great day. Bye, everyone.